Guys, how's everyone doing? Hey guys, how's everyone doing? Great. Good to hear. I'm Rusty Greif. I'm a managing director at 1776. I also help manage our venture fund. So I actually actively invest not just the companies that we incubate at 1776, but companies across the world. Actually, we co-invest with some of the larger funds across our core verticals. And we're going to focus on this panel. Beyond being someone that does early stage investing, I'm also an ed tech entrepreneur. I founded 2 companies in Silicon Valley with raising a lot of venture capital for some of the top funds in the world. And so I have both perspectives in wearing hats, as do many other folks here on the panel, of not just being an investor, but being an entrepreneur and running around the valley and other places with a tin cup in my hand, pleading and crying and so forth, and have the bruises to show for being rejected and also receiving a fair amount of capital on the venture side. What we want to do today for the next hour is we have 3 incredibly bright, talented, highly respected investors. And the focus, obviously, for the course has been startups that matter. And really what we want to focus on today, and I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves, give a little bit of perspective of where they're coming from, what their individual funds do. There's a lot of different perspectives here on the table. Is talking about highly entrenched companies, right? What does it mean to invest, be an early stage investor, venture capitalist, be an entrepreneur in these highly regulated industries? And there are some unusual characteristics that come with that. And you guys have been talking a lot about that over the last however many weeks. We wanted to take a little bit of a different angle with it, which is just folks here with capital that have had a lot of success, as well as learn from some failures on the investing side, both as entrepreneurs and as investors in these startups in highly regulated, highly entrenched, large-scale sectors. So why don't we first, I'm going to introduce Dana. Why don't we first just introduce yourself, your fund, and maybe a minute or two what you guys are doing, and then we'll open it up to the program.
Okay. Hi, I'm Dana Grayson. I'm at NEA. It's a large venture capital fund. I think we have the dubious honor of having raised the largest venture capital fund ever about a year ago.
And how much dough?
$3 billion, which in private equity terms is not nearly the largest, but in venture, to raise that amount of capital and still stay focused on the early stages is uncommon. So at NEA, we've been around since the 70s. Actually, we are one of the oldest venture capital funds in the country. We were actually founded in Baltimore and on the West Coast at the same time by 3 founders back in the 70s. And we've gone on to raise 15 subsequent funds, and we're investing now out of our 15th fund. About half of our investors are in Menlo Park. But half of our investors are still here. We moved the investors down to the DC area. We're in Chevy Chase, right across the street from DC. And our office here, the managing partner of our life sciences practice is here. The managing partner of our whole firm is here. So there's 5 tech partners, I think about 5 life sciences partners, and then equal numbers out on the West Coast, if not slightly more. Our capital on the East Coast, we really focus on Boston, New York, DC, of course, Chicago. We kind of define the East Coast as anything outside of Silicon Valley. And then our West Coast investors really focus on Silicon Valley. There's a lot going on there. I personally joined NEA about 3 years ago. I've been in venture about 9 years. Prior to NEA, I was at a firm called Northbridge Venture Partners in Boston. Prior to that, I was in business school like you guys. And prior to that, I had more of an operating background doing product management, product design, and consulting right out of undergrad. But at NEA, I focus on early stage consumer services and applications targeting professional users, enterprise users. That really spans everything from a couple of fintech investments that I have, CAD and product design companies that I've invested in. There's probably 2 or 3 that are in and around that space. And then I have a couple of consumer service companies, one called FrameBridge that's here in the DC area, one called Glam Squad, which is at the Uber end of super consumer. So it really kind of runs the gamut. But the common theme between all of these companies is their services touch the end user and really succeed or fail based on end user adoption, regardless of whether their industry is regulated or not.
Miles?
I'm Miles Reidy. I'm a partner at QED Investments. We describe ourselves best as a boutique venture capital firm. We're founded by 4 operators who were part of the startup of Capital One. We are former bankers, and very glad to say former as part of that description. Our fund's a little different. In terms of funding, we're not nearly as big or as NEA. In fact, we don't accept outside money. We only invest our personal capital. We do that for a couple reasons. One is we think you make better decisions when it's your money. You certainly feel the mistakes. But 2, it allows us to have a lot of flexibility in what we invest in and what the time horizons are, because we don't have to give the money back. We're fintech investors. We handle just about any range of fintech. We're probably the deepest in the fintech world. We understand the banking world quite well. I personally handle our international investments. I do our healthcare investments, which we've just started with a company from 1776. And I also do the workouts. So I'm the guy who shows up unannounced when something really bad has happened. So if I remember on your calendars in the future and there's not a reason and you're an investment company, it's probably not a good day.
Thanks,
Alex, with that.
That's great. I'm Alex Acree. I'm a managing director of Fenway Summer Ventures. We are a fintech-focused VC firm, also based down here, unsurprisingly, in Washington, D.C. area. We are, at the other end of the spectrum from NEA in terms of size and stage. This is our first venture capital fund, and we are, very excited to be rolling out this year. We are the venture capital firm of, unsurprisingly, a company called Fenway Summer, which was started here about 2.5 years ago, with the mission of kind of flexibly pursuing the opportunities in financial services today, including through advising companies, building our own ventures, and also investing in other people's companies. So to that end, we've provided consulting services to a wide range of folks in the financial services space. We've also built a mortgage company, which is out in San Francisco. We have a credit card business based here in Washington, and a student lender in Delaware. And about a year ago, we began the process of rolling out our first venture capital fund. So happy to speak about that experience. Like QED, with whom we're very happy to get a chance to work. We make early stage investments in fintech, primarily in seed and Series A.
Great, thanks. So a pretty killer group with a lot of interesting perspectives and experiences, especially across education, health, fintech, some consumer, or a lot of consumer. So one of the things is we've been talking about throughout this class is the unicorn. So I thought maybe we'd start a little bit of kind of going back and then moving forward, which is a lot of time and energy is spent, at least on the media from a venture standpoint, of what is a unicorn, how do we get to the unicorn, and so forth. And everyone's hope and dreams as a startup is to get there. The dynamics change pretty profoundly when you're talking about companies that are more regulated, that are in more highly regulated industries. The market size may be massive. There may be $1 trillion of spending across health or education, or certainly in fintech. But it does create some different characteristics around how do you get there. For a lot of companies that dream maybe an IPO, in more regulated industries, oftentimes that exit may resemble more what an acquisition may look like, or some kind of M&A deal. I'm just curious, and again, I'm happy to open it up and let you guys jump in. How do you guys think about the unicorn or those dynamics around more regulated industries? Is that realistic, or does it create a new burden that you guys think about as you're looking to invest? I'm going to go with you, Miles, because you're staring at me first. So.
Making eye contact's another bad thing
right.
to do. I'll be honest, it's irrelevant to us.
Okay.
We like unicorns. They're great to have in the portfolio. My ability to predict a unicorn 5 years from now is not very good. Mm-hmm. My ability to find businesses that have good core values, that have a unit economics we understand, we can do that. And then, if we're good investors and they're good management, they might become a unicorn. But in terms of selecting, to me, it's not even a function of our criteria.
Do you see any dynamics different from a criteria standpoint with with companies that we've been talking a lot over the last however many weeks that may be financial service oriented, health and
I think
education that are different than what
it's-
folks would call traditional consumer oriented businesses?
It's faster to scale a B2B business.
Uh-huh.
You have more margin pressure because you're dealing with entities that negotiate. Again, an IPO to me is a potential outcome. It's not the best outcome from an investor. I actually prefer strategic outcomes because with IPOs, there's an event and then you have to wait 6 months until you actually get your cash. And in our business, we don't actually make any money till it's cash.
Right.
It's hard to spend gains. So we're, again, focused just on the core fundamentals of the business.
Mm-hmm. Dana, how do you think about that? Especially you have a huge healthcare business. You guys you've kind of moved into education and other areas that are more traditionally regulated size. I'm just curious on how you guys think about it.
Well, specifically on the unicorn topic, I think it's important to define what these, quote unquote unicorns are. There's specifically, private valuations that have valued companies at $1 billion or greater. And to Miles's point, when a company's public, they've achieved an event and then you ostensibly get to liquidate your capital. By the way, if you own like 20 or 30% of the company, it's even harder to liquidate out of those companies. If it's a private markup of, $1 billion, even if it's less than $1 billion, if it's just a private markup, it's even less liquid. It's not liquid at all. So this is again a dubious honor to have been named a unicorn. I think what we have seen over the past, 5 years really since 2009 is, partly people have pointed to this lean startup mentality that it's easier to start a company. And, it's not like it was 15 years ago where it cost, hundreds of thousands of dollars just to get the servers going to run an online business, much less, get a product out to market. It's much, much faster these days with Amazon Web Services, et cetera. So that kind of started it. And then we've seen with online marketing and even in the B2B side, just the ability for end users inside an enterprise to make a purchase decision versus the CIO. The result of all of these three things happening is that the companies have been able to achieve growth much, much faster. And we're talking about, 20% month over month type of growth in the early stages. And, in some cases, we were just talking about a company today that's grown 300% since we last invested, which was just a year ago. And so the private markets have kind of gone wacky and like, oh my gosh, we haven't seen this. It's so different than the bubble, of 2000 or 1999, in that those companies all were valued heavily but had nothing. These companies have something that's called growth and it's revenue, so let's all value them at $1 billion. We're probably still what's missing is really a lot of these unit economics a lot of times, and that's where we turn our attention. Turns out, entrepreneurs are smart too. They can, we can all figure out and fool ourselves into thinking that there are real unit economics in some of these businesses too. But where it all will end, I have no idea. I can tell you that on the regulated side, on our life sciences side, we don't oddly call them unicorns, and frankly, that has been a very successful part of our business in the past couple of years with real liquidity, real exits, real IPOs, and it's the word unicorn is aptly named because unicorns don't really exist.
Exactly.
So we'll see where this all ends, but I think the good news is a lot of these companies do have real revenue, they have real growth. The bad news is they've raised a ton of capital and their burn rates are really, really high, and in some cases they haven't worked out their unit economics. So can they wisely use the cash while they build their business? Will be the question we all have to answer in the next couple of years.
Absolutely. And so Dana touched on a couple of big things, Alex. I want to pull you in on this, which is also looking at the timing of growth. Even as we're doing early stage at 1776, we're seeing similar dynamics with early companies that literally in the last 6 to 8 months we're expecting and looking at 20 to 30% month over month growth. Can at times change the dynamic as you think about early stage leading into a Series A investing. How do you guys think about it on the fintech side, the relationship to growth that you're looking at over a 3 to 6 to 9 month period of time, and also understand that it has its own regulatory issues that you guys may need to manage. And so I always hate this term, but it's one that's used often, is this idea of being a patient investor and letting the market catch up to the big idea that maybe because of the regulations or the marketplace that's in play.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that, this question really touched on for me was this idea of, that there's a lot of, sort of startup mantras these days about, minimally viable product and failing fast and things like that. In a regulated industry, I mean, those terms are difficult, right? Because, what is a minimally viable product, in an industry where, compliance is required from the get-go, right? And so, for us, like sometimes we've, been able to see startups that have really, really strong growth trajectories, but maybe haven't really focused on some of the nuts and bolts that we think are necessary to build a long-term sustainable business in a compliant way. And so that's something I think we really focus on. And likewise, in a regulated space, what does it actually mean to fail fast, and how do you go to a state regulator and say we're here to really experiment and see if this works, and if it doesn't work, then we're just going to kind of shut it down. And so I think that's one of the things we really think about with growth in regulated industry.
Miles, see the same thing?
Yeah, I think in financial services, in a lending type business, there's a certain maturity, a little bit more experience you look for in your management team, that they understand the rules, and they understand the rules, so they don't make silly mistakes. I will tell you, there is an advantage a startup has in a very compliant-related industry, in that it is materially easier to build a compliant function from a startup than to retrofit an existing operation. One of the things that commercial banks struggle with, they're very large, very complex operations. Getting compliance wired through their organizations is really difficult. If you have a startup and you're focused on a single product, you actually can do that. If you do it well, to me, it's a significant barrier to entry. But instead of the mythical 22-year-old kid in a garage, you look for someone who has some business experience, so that they have a little bit more judgment to understand and make those trade-offs.
So do you guys, I'm curious, I mean, at 1776, and again, probably different stage of entrepreneurs and or stage of companies, we spend a lot of time and energy on, to some degree, what we will define as regulatory hacking, but we literally put programs together that really do help define and or refine and or work with our entrepreneurs on some of the regulatory issues that they need to, not just issues of compliance, but understanding how to navigate in I've had 15 years of launching companies in the education space. I have a pretty good understanding of how to manage through Title IV, Title I funding, working with state agencies for funding and so forth, how to actually, frankly, navigate around universities and K-12 school systems and districts, because they're a burden for growth in many respects. So we spend a fair amount of time and energy. Does NEA put resources around that, and or other, you guys around working with entrepreneurs to kind of better understand how to manage some of those obstacles to realize growth?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, every partner at our firm is on the board of these companies, and so we subscribe. We do two things. One, we subscribe to the way you manage companies, which is being on the board and helping build the right management team around the entrepreneur, helping bring on other outside board members or other investors that can really be value add along with you. And then separately, we do other things, like we have a head of sort of federal inside NEA, Scott Frederick, who recently joined, who's helping sort of these companies navigate some of these regulatory things. On the life sciences side, it gets way more complex, and I'd say it kind of permeates all the way through our investing staff. Everybody is familiar with it. Dave Mott, who was the CEO of MedImmune, and then went on to run MedImmune Ventures, and is now managing partner on our life sciences side, kind of lives and breathes the stuff. But absolutely, it's core to what we do.
Yeah, I mean that's for us. I mean, on the regulatory side is a big value add that we try to bring, and working with our portfolio companies and best practices. I mean, within different verticals, there's a finite number of sort of categories of issues that we see, and it's about pattern recognition, and as Miles said, finding finding a management team that, on the one hand has, really ambitious visions to change the world, but is doing it we like to say, in a very conservative way, which doesn't mean that they're not taking risks, they're taking big risks to change the industry, but they're doing it in a way where, they've really crossed their T's, dotted their I's, really set up, a good process for, milestones and feedback and correcting problems early, so.
Cool.
Yeah.
So we have a room of, how many students are here around? Roughly? 23. All right, 23. So we have 23 potential rock star entrepreneurs, either now, a year from now, 10 or 15, or maybe 30 years from now. And so I'd love to turn the tables a little bit more on the investor side, on what you guys look for in a deal, what you look for in a founding team, what excites you about certain deals, especially those that, again, maybe a little bit hairy because of regulatory issues, may have its own complexities, as Mal's talking about, where there may be a need for sophistication, understanding from a business model standpoint, from a team standpoint. Miles, kick us off. In general, what are the things, I'm going to you, just in general, what are the things that excite you when you have a team that's coming in to pitch you on a business?
We look for a team that doesn't resort to a lot of the current buzzwords, because I don't know what they are.
Well, share the buzzwords that they should not be using when they pitch you.
Impact investor,
Okay.
unicorn, all of the kind of whatever you see in the press, don't use it. Don't show up with a giant PowerPoint deck.
Right.
What I am looking for is
The Uber of things? You don't want to say the Uber of things?
I don't want to hear the Uber
Right.
of things.
Dana gets that 30 times a day.
I don't want
Right.
to hear millennial. We serve millennials because there's 60 million. They're all behaving the same
Right.
way. Maybe not.
I don't, are you guys writing any of this down? It's just great.
What I am looking for is, do they understand their customer? And do they have a policy that puts the customer first? Because in any type of these businesses that is regulated, whether it's financial services or healthcare, there typically tends to be a fairly significant information advantage a provider has over a customer. And you have to have policies that control you from doing bad things. And then we look at, and if they understand those unit economics, we look at what's the team. Because we've never made an investment that worked out really well where the actual results matched the initial set of numbers.
Sure.
And so you look for three things. You look for a team with good character that has the ability to recognize when the market's telling them their idea is not working. You're looking for that team that has good insight, that they can develop a workable plan to react to that, and they'll tell you about it as an investor. And then you're looking for that team that has good skills to execute that plan. And it's really about a team that embraces its failures. We learn more from your failures than you learn from your successes. And we look at that. At the end of the day, we're character investors, and at an earlier stage, that's really all there is.
I remember my first company that I was raising money and wound up going with a great venture firm, lead firm in Silicon Valley. And one of the things that the partner said to me and my two partners was, I think I can get into trouble with you guys. And he was comfortable with that, understanding that we were going to get into trouble. Like to Miles' point, whatever our gorgeous, shiny business model, there was no way it was ever going to be realized that week, that month, whatever it may be. And he was comfortable with the fact that we could get into trouble and figure it out together as an investor and as an entrepreneurial team and so forth. And that was something that was really powerful for us, where we felt excited and comfortable that there was enough trust that we could all get into trouble together and figure it out. So Dana, how many times do you get pitched on an average week on companies?
Me personally, across the
In the
firm,
supermarket, in the,
hundreds,
right.
No, that doesn't happen.
Right.
Although it does in the Bay Area, it rarely happens here, but that would be fine too. But I probably take 3 to 5. I probably take 3 to 5 meetings a week and looking at new investments. I probably get 4 to 10 new opportunities a day into my inbox, whether they be from trusted referrals or whatnot. We can go into how you would get introduced to a venture firm, and it all comes down to sort of that trusted referral and rising to the top of someone's inbox or voicemail or whatever it is.
What breaks through for you, though, as you think about kind of the criteria either for NEA,
the
firm, or just for you
putting
personally?
the introduction aside, because
Yeah.
you can get introduced in many ways, and I think it's more. I think it's similar to what Miles said. I think you want to. I certainly don't have a rule about not investing in first-time founders. I think that's actually sometimes more exciting for the reasons that MI2.
That Mark was saying, yeah.
Guy was talking about is that, innovation can come from anywhere. It's just the ability to recognize it and the ability to really be constantly asking yourself, like, why is this still a problem? and to hear being told over and over again, well, that's just not the way it works. It's like, we want to invest in the people that are figuring out how it should work in the future, and not being satisfied with the answer if that's just going to be too hard or that's just not the way it works. So I often find that the younger entrepreneurs, the first time entrepreneurs, whether they're young or not, kind of are sort of blissfully ignorant of those cautionary tales, and that's a good thing. However, at the same time, we want people who really understand the problem. So sort of that self-awareness is really important, to be able to say, like, I see the problem, I familiarize with my problem, I become the de facto expert because I've investigated or I experienced it personally or something. But I'm also smart enough and self-aware enough to know what I don't know around building a fintech business. So surrounding yourself with the right other team members, a co-founder or advisors, and then yes, the investors too, also help. But it's really about who's on that core team, and investors can help you build that team. But it's much better, we find, when sort of that initial founding team grows organically. But that's really it, kind of, self-awareness and expertise, either professed or gained by experiencing the problem firsthand.
Great. Alex, any maybe insights, maybe a case study on maybe a pitch that went wrong for these guys to understand and why it went wrong?
Yeah.
And maybe just some patterns that are recognized that maybe have been consistent with pitches that haven't quite worked, and stringing that along of what those themes would look like may be helpful for some of these guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's a lot of funny stories, frankly. But when you have enough meetings, you end up seeing some pretty funny stuff. But leaving those aside, I mean, in terms of the pitches, I think that we really like, and so the converse of it are the ones that I think are harder for us, right? Are people that can, entrepreneurs, the management team that can articulate a very clear and simple vision for what it is that they're trying to achieve. Because I think a lot of times when you get in heavily regulated space, you can end up with very long conversations about payments middleware and stuff like that, and it's easy for your eyes to kind of glaze over. And so I think from the outset, being able to articulate a clear vision about what it is in simple terms about what they're trying to achieve, I think is really important for us. And then follow that up by demonstrating that significant preparation and depth in the specific area. I mean, I love it when the materials that are available and the founders have anticipated the kinds of in-depth questions that we're going to want to get to. I think when we have meetings where it's clear that the founders haven't thought about unit economics at all, those are typically shorter meetings, right? And so I think it's a clear vision, ambitious vision, followed up with substantial preparation and trying to anticipate in great detail kind of what the kinds of questions that are going to be. Those are the best ones for us.
Cool. On the flip side, for all of these guys that will be starting companies if and when they want to, and Dana, you touched a little bit about this, which was kind of the referral. Raising money is really hard.
Very hard.
It's really, really hard. And I say this all the time. I think there's been kind of this massive disservice, as you guys were talking about before, which is the media with the unicorns and, Shark Tank is cool and fun and great and all of that. And, HBO has Silicon Valley and all that. And so, we've created this whole new level of seduction around the startup in mainstream media. And the reality is, from a fundraising standpoint, it's an extraordinary grind. And it's, you have to get really comfortable and really embrace the power of rejection, because more often than not, people are just simply going to say no in really gracious, lovely ways. But they're going to definitely say no. And so I'm curious just, and Dan, if you don't mind starting, just how you think about what are your best kept secrets or not on helping people better understand how to raise money, and more importantly, how they think about sources for money, as in funds that may make sense for them, angels and so forth. I mean, again, the theme this for the class has been startups that matter. So I always think about funds that have an expertise in fintech. If you're a health company or an education, probably not the ideal source. But a lot of entrepreneurs don't really think about that necessarily as they're looking for brand names like an NEA or others that they think would be an ideal source. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, and keep in mind, we're not just the venture capitalists sitting around doling out the money. We're also on the other side of the table. Once we invest in a company, we often invest at the seed level or Series A. We're then on the other side of the table with the entrepreneur and helping, make sure that our companies are financed appropriately and financed well until they don't need it anymore, which is oddly never happens, even when you're public, right? So, it just never happens. No, really though. So what we always even tell our companies that I'm on the board of is, always be fundraising, and always be fundraising. People think about like, now I'm going to go and like execute. I'm going to go like build my product and be on the market. And I tell CEOs it's you have 3 jobs. You have 1, building the company and building the product and getting it out to market. You have 2, being a constant recruiter, hiring people all the time, interviewing people all the time, even when you don't need them. And 3, fundraising all the time, because even when you are public, like, you will always be fundraising. And as the CEO and founder of your company, especially the CEO, some people don't go on to continue being the CEO, usually by choice. But those are really, your day to day is made up less of the first and more of the latter 2 as the company gets bigger and bigger. So it really has to be this mindset of, you have to be that passionate about it that you'll constantly be telling people to come join you and constantly be telling people they should invest in you, or subliminally telling them both these things. So my best advice is to raise money when you don't need it. Always be fundraising. And then always be networking. And, first, if you're always networking, you'll get both of those things. People that you love to come work with you, and people to invest in your company. And you're networking constantly, and you'll find your way to the right people that are suitable for your business. And if you're doing it at times when you don't need it, you'll probably be meeting those people for advice and not for money originally. So that's a good thing.
It's great. It's really great advice. Alex, other thoughts on just helping all of us kind of figure out how you navigate through the early stages, especially as you think about seed capital to raising capital.
Yeah, absolutely. I find that the best meetings I have, and having been an entrepreneur before myself, the kinds of conversations I like to have and the meetings I like to have, I should say, are really conversations, right? So I really appreciate when the folks I meet with, this is kind of like, just basic advice for life. It's nice to look into the people that you're going to meet with, look into the firms, be prepared to talk about, what it is that makes them excited. And, this is really a two-way interview. This is to the extent that you sit there more as like a one-way, like I'm trying to sell you kind of meeting, I think it's going to be much less productive for everyone. But, come in there like an equal. Entrepreneurs are at the least the equals of the folks who invest in them. And so, I really like to be able to have a conversation with folks who are informed and prepared.
Miles, any other thoughts?
I follow up on that. You need to have a really high bar who you choose to let invest in your company. Yeah. And that's really important. And you need to actually think about those characteristics, because we're all different. And Alex might be a match for company A, I might be a better match for company B, but a disaster at that company A. And so really think about what you're looking for in an investor over and above capital. We all bring capital, but have that high bar and think about that. And you can learn, we all have reputations, you can talk to our companies, find out who are good to work with, who may not be, but who meets your criteria. It's just like a job interview. When you go on a job interview, it's as much an interview of the company as it is of you, because you need to make that decision. The same with taking money from an investor, because once that check clears, you're stuck with us. And it's a bad decision for everybody if it's not a good fit. And so have a real high bar. What frustrates me sometimes is I ask people, why'd you come to us? And I get a blank stare. And that scares me, because it means they're not thinking ahead. The other thing is raise money when you don't need it, as opposed to when you're about to run out of money, because it's very tempting for people like us when you're about to run out of money to drive a better deal. Actually, you know,
Seem like such nice people here at the table, but in fact,
don't put me in that situation.
just some quick takeaways on that, because I think it's hugely important, and Miles just went there, and Dana obviously introduced it first, which is exactly that. Don't raise money when you need, and absolutely, it's amazing. You can kind of feel it, you can feel the energy, you can smell it along the way when someone walks into a room and there's a level of desperation. It's just, it's a classic case of managing leverage. The other
It also
thing-
just represents that you're not a great manager.
Exactly. Well,
Right, but it's a higher risk of
Dana's
investment.
exactly right.
Right.
I have a very good friend who was a rock star CEO in San Francisco in the Valley. He just forgot to raise money though, and so at the end of the day, he really didn't manage.
Not a rock star
Exactly.
CEO.
And he was not a rock star CEO. I was just gonna say it's exactly right. The second thing that Alex talked about is just this idea of conversation and dialogue and building relationships. Raising money is not a transactional experience. It is about a relationship. And Mal's touched on it even before. That money is strategic. As Dana was saying, you write the check, you're now a board member. You're an active member to grow that company. That's a hugely powerful concept of the idea of being in a relationship, getting into trouble together, pivoting together, changing the business model, working through problems, exactly what investors do with their founding teams and their entrepreneurs. It's a very much relationship-driven experience, not transactional, and not all money is the same. So appreciate you guys bringing that up. So we deliberately want to leave a lot of time for some Q&A. You guys have a lot of questions. So I'd love to open it up and folks ask away.